From time to time, we have to examine our beliefs, our ideologies, and our praxis. I am no exception. As a black anarchist, I am forced to fight an uphill battle to bring my ideas into public discourse, going against both the neoliberal capitalist establishment and the white supremacist power structures that feed off of it. After all, the left doesn't have fossil fuel billionaires to signal boost us. The end result is that we have a strong tendency towards solidarity. We ultimately want our movement to be as large as possible. As such, we associate with a lot of mechanisms that are an essential part of class consciousness in our war against unjust hierarchies. That said, as I mentioned at the beginning of this pretentious preamble, we need to deconstruct our relationships with some of these concepts, as difficult as it may be, and identify the bad actors that have also utilized the tools of the proletariat. Oh yes, I'm going to talk about a bad union. Out the gate, I need to set the tone for what I'm going to be discussing today. I am talking about unions that are bad in the sense that they are detrimental to society as a whole, and an enemy of the working class. I will not be engaging with everyone's bad union experience anecdote, because as proven with overwhelming evidence, unions are categorically good for the workers they represent, and the wide-scale decline of union presence coincides nicely with historic levels of wealth disparity and wage stagnation that we are now experiencing. So, if you are typing up that my bad union experience comment, save it, scab. Recent events of police brutality have led to some police union leaders coming out and making, we'll say, tone-deaf statements.
In the black community, mothers are worried about their children getting home from school without being killed by a cop. What world are we living in? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
Now, I've known for several years that police unions exist. In many areas, they go under the name of Fraternal Order of Police. My first job in high school actually was a telemarketer doing cold call solicitations for FOP fundraising. What I've learned over the years, and what many are just finding out, is that FOPs and police unions have unprecedented levels of influence, stretching far beyond the labor conditions and salary of peace officers. They have put an illegal, banned chokehold on city and state governments and sway public policy. So it would help to know how we got to this point. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1915, 2 patrol officers met with 21 other members of their local police bureau in May, too soon, and established the Fraternal Order of Police. This was the creation of the most influential law enforcement union in the United States, even though, due to anti-union sentiment at the time, and the fact that they were oftentimes weaponized against labor organizers, they opted not to brand themselves as such, even if that is how they operated. The newly minted FOP brought grievances before the mayor and city council that they felt were being ignored. 3 years later, they would go on to become a national organization. Any elected, appointed, or full-time employed law enforcement officer of the United States was eligible for membership. A great many lodges also have provisions in place for retirees. In 1920, some of the wives formed an auxiliary of the FOP for family members. Another auxiliary was later formed for associates that weren't eligible members or the family of members. Now, this auxiliary was a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, and it has friends, politicians, businesses, and other citizens among its ranks. That was, by the way, the group that I solicited for in high school. The FOP wrote a constitution stating that race, creed, nor color shall be no par. Yeah, no, they really wrote that with a straight face. And, it's funny given, Aside from their anti-strike policy, which hasn't even been enforced for over 50 years, on the surface, one would see their fundraising and advocacy for better working conditions, salary, and legal representation as an example of a durable union doing what it does best, improving the lives of workers and protecting their livelihoods. Things become a little bit more sinister, however, when you dig a little deeper, and this is where it hurts me a little bit. Probing my own general support for organized labor, examining my socialist leanings, while also being critical of a massive and really powerful union. But we can power through this together, because I'm all out of nice things to say. The FOP established their reputation of shielding police forces from accountability in the 1960s, following a nationwide push for police review boards. This came after a solid decade of state violence and brutality being used against civil rights demonstrators. This also coincided with the abolition of Jim Crow laws across the country, many of which were enforced by those same police. The FOP saw these calls for oversight as a sinister government movement against law enforcement. It is around this time that the ACLU would come in and become a longtime rival of the FOP regarding the topic of police brutality. The FOP at one point called them a liberal attempt to discredit law enforcement, which is a little odd to me because the ACLU openly shares many of the times they have supported policemen and women, defending officers, speaking out against prison privatization, defending the freedom of religion of Jewish and Muslim officers, race, creed, nor color. These guys suck. The FOP claims to remain strictly apolitical, supported the Social Security Fairness Act, supported the current president's push to privatize Social Security, and opposes mandatory participation in the Social Security system, supports the Public Safety Employer-Employee Cooperation Act of 2007, supports the Law Enforcement Officers Equity Act, which seeks to expand the definition of law enforcement officer under the Civil Service Requirement System in order to include federal police and CBP and ICE. They lobbied Congress to make crimes against police officers hate crimes. So keep in mind, I don't necessarily disagree with all of those things, and I don't think that it's wrong for unions to be involved in politics. Everything is political. I do, however, take issue with them continuing their stance that they are apolitical, and I can be critical of the hills they choose to die on. Oh, I forgot one. In 2016, they endorsed the Republican Party candidate Donald Trump for U.S. president. I should have led with that. In 1991, FOP President Dewey Stokes said that Rodney King's brutal beating at the hands of police was the result of stress on the job and the media's exploitation of the negatives of law enforcement. The FOP vocally supported the death penalty for political activist, journalist, and former Black Panther Mumia Abu-Jamal, earning them condemnation from Amnesty International. In 2018, the FOP chapter in South Carolina vocally objected to Angie Thomas's award-winning novel, The Hate U Give, being added to a high school summer reading list due to depictions of police violence. This doesn't even get into the professional atmosphere created by the presence of an organization like the FOP. They often foot the bill on expensive legal counsel for officers facing criminal charges. The FOP and other police unions have pressured lawmakers into limiting the powers of prosecutors investigating misconduct. Anytime officers are fired for misconduct, you better believe that regardless of the reason, the FOP will be right there, ready and waiting to come out and vocally condemn the democratically elected leaders of cities and towns. And it's really easy to fall into their trap. The police have positioned themselves as the physical embodiment of law and order. The way they spin it, if you are critical of police, you are anti-police. If you are anti-police, you are anti-laws. If you're anti-laws, you're pro-crime. You don't want to be pro-crime, do you? You are a law-abiding citizen, aren't you? You don't want to have packs of criminals roving our streets, threatening good people like you and me. What, you want to divert funding from the police department towards violence prevention programs and initiatives? Why would you want to do that? Certainly you and your constituents wouldn't like it if we weren't able to respond to your emergency calls in a timely fashion. Where was I? Oh. In some cities, police unions have even pushed back against federally mandated reforms, which is often the only way that changes get adopted. The Cleveland Police Union president stating, "Every time a kid points a gun, he has to do a use of force investigation. Now guys aren't pointing their guns when they should be pointing their guns." Which, first of all, yes, officers should be pointing their guns at people less often in general. Secondly, they are afraid to do the thing they always claim to do when they fear for their lives because of paperwork. Thirdly, this is a really tone-deaf phrasing, given what happened the last time a cop in Cleveland, Ohio, an open carry state by the way, came across an actual kid pointing a toy gun.
That doesn't happen!
Remember earlier when I was memeing about police unions acting like mobsters pushing a protection racket? Well, they also have their own code of silence. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how comfortable the FOP and police unions like it have made cops with the knowledge that they won't be held accountable for their actions. Minneapolis PD Union President Bob Kroll, who has called protesters a terrorist movement and has at least 29 complaints against him, praised President Trump for putting the handcuffs on the criminals instead of us. He was elected in 2015 in response to the appointment of a reform-minded police chief. In the face of accountability, the unions dig in their heels. So despite all of that and their lack of solidarity with other labor organizations and cops' long history of violence targeting labor movements, I just don't know where this leaves me. Police unions are a problem, but if you ask me, a socialist, if I'm ready to start the ball rolling on the dissolution and abolition of a union representing public servants, I still don't know. It's hard. I just don't know if I'm ready to foster an anti-union sentiment. Hopefully, though, at the very least, we can condemn the actions of these bad comrades. Thank you for watching. Follow me on Twitch, where I stream video games and give lectures on different subjects. Find me on Twitter, where I race bait as a hobby. And I do, if you are so inclined, have a Patreon. Thank you. The support is appreciated. Take care.